Tess, it's such a pleasure meeting you. As you know, you're very popular in Turkey, and I would like to ask you a few questions. Can you take us through your writing process? Because some of your readers, they're writing their own novels, and they would maybe like a few hints about how to write a bestseller, or how to do the time management and so on.
Well, there's no right or wrong way to write a novel. All you have to do is finish it. So first for me comes the idea. And the idea is something that makes me go, oh, what happens next? And I get those ideas from reading newspapers or magazines, true crime, or conversation, sometimes just traveling. So as an example, I read a story in the newspaper about a woman who was declared dead, and she was put into a body bag, and they took her to the morgue, and she woke up. So that became the beginning of a story. I don't plot my stories out ahead of time. I just want to see what happens next, and so I discover it as I'm writing the first draft. The other thing I would say to beginning authors is never stop the book and put it away. Always keep on writing, even though you don't know what the ending is, because you don't know what the story is until you finish the first draft.
Your books are so detailed, and they're excellent details. Does it come from your medical background, and how did you? You were a doctor, and then how did you decide to write books, or was writing always a passion for you?
Well, writing was always a passion. I wrote my first book when I was 7 years old. Wow. But I went into medicine because my father thought I could not make a living as a writer. But 5 years after practicing medicine, I had a child, and I stayed home with him for a couple of months, and that's when I wrote my first book. So what I find is that medicine is really good for adding the details for crime novels, the medical examiner, the pathology, that is useful. But for me, the important details are not the science. It's the things, you're using your five senses. What does something smell like, or look like, or you listen. So just bringing in all those senses, it makes the reader feel that they are there.
So when you became such a successful writer, did your parents say, well, you did good, you know?
Yeah, they did. They did. Certainly my mother enjoyed reading the books. My mother liked frightening things, and so she was very happy to see that I was writing scary stories.
Do you use your medical experiences or your previous education when writing your books, when you're researching for your books?
Well, I think that everything we've ever learned or done in our lives becomes a really important source material. So when I talk about Maura Isles standing in the autopsy room and doing an autopsy, it's because I've seen that during my medical training. But I also bring in stuff that I learned from college. I was an anthropology major and very interested in Egyptology. So I brought some of that into the stories. But then there's also research you have to do for things you don't know. I wrote a book that was set on the International Space Station, and that required 2 years of research with NASA. So what I don't know, I do the research for it. It turns out the research is the most fun of writing, the part of writing the book.
What is it, do you think, that makes murder and crime so fascinating for all of us? Like, you know, it's hideous, but still, we're so obsessed with it. That's why we watch the serial killers' lives, and then we read your books, and like the crime category is such a popular category. Do you think it's interesting for humankind to be disinterested to crime and horror?
Well, think about the first stories that were told around the campfire when we were cavemen. They were probably scary stories. So we've always been, I think, especially women, I think, we're very focused on things that frighten us. And it has to do with, we know the world is a dangerous place. And maybe there's something about a scary story that allows us to face our fears, to think, what would I do? To feel as if when you finish the story and everything turns out okay, this sense of relief that I escaped. they'll always be with us, and certainly it is an international trend that people like to read crime stories and scary stories.
And you know, it's nice to have the adrenaline when you're reading those stories, but then knowing that you're safe.
That's right. The adrenaline is we all go for the adrenaline, and then to know that it's a safe way to be frightened.
You do a lot of research when you're writing, before you write the books and maybe while writing the books. Does this research, how does it affect your life? You know, like the things that because you write about horrifying stuff, and then, you know, like thinking about it. I mean, you write about really scary stuff like during the day, and then, you know, like then you have to go and eat lunch with your kids. You know, it's like, does it affect you?
Well, sometimes the research really gets into my head. So when I did the research for Gravity, by the end of the first year, my dreams were all about weightlessness. I dreamt that I was floating because I was reading so much about that. Reading about crime, I think I've always known that things are dangerous out there. I've always known that there were bad people out there, and it just, I suppose, writing about crime just reinforces what I've always believed about people. I mean, most of us are good. Most of us would never hurt anything, but there's a small minority of human beings who they thrive on violence, and they like to see people hurt, and that's what I really write about, and it's kind of scary. Yeah. There's a pessimistic view of humankind, I'm afraid.
You portray the serial killers so well, like the people who, as you say, who like the violence and who like hurting people. How do you get into the mind of those serial killers? Like,
it's a little bit like getting into the mind of a lion. Okay, lions kill because it's part of who they are, and it's part of how they survive. If you put yourself into the head of the lion, then you start to look at the world in a different way. And that's what I tried to do. I try to put myself in the head of a serial killer. And you walk around a shopping mall and you look at people differently. You think, which one is possible prey? Which one could I take down? And I think that's really how I do it. Is I just try a little. It's a little bit of acting, I suppose. Try to embody that character, that personality, and you see the world differently.
About we launched your new book, The Shape of Night, and can you give us a little bit of teaser for our readers, just who's main character and how does it go about it? And
well, my main character is a woman named Ava who has done something terrible, and she is feeling so guilty and ashamed. She leaves her home and tries to escape to a small town in Maine. She rents a house there on the ocean, and at night she starts to see and hear things that she's not sure are there. Soon she thinks the house is haunted by a very handsome sea captain, and she begins a relationship with this ghost. But after a while she learns that every woman who's come to live in this house has died there. Now she wonders if the ghost is dangerous. So it's a little bit of a murder mystery, but it's very much a psychological suspense novel.
The book is set you live in Maine, right? Writing in a place where you live, does it help with the writing process? Like, you know, the places and, yeah.
Yeah, when I write about the view that Ava sees from her house, it's the view from my window. And the little town that she has moved to, there are a lot of things about my town that are similar. You know, I only have 5,000 people in my village, and a lot of us know each other, and there are secrets in town that we're not going to tell other people. So when Ava comes to this little town, she's very much an outsider, and it made it easy for me to write because I know that experience.
Although this book is set in Maine, most of your books, like the Rizzoli and Isles series at least, it's set in Boston. What is the importance of Boston for you?
Well, I don't set them in Maine because Maine is we have a very low murder rate. Yeah. We don't have a lot of murders in Maine, and it wouldn't make sense to have a homicide investigator who's always investigating all these murders in Maine. So I moved it to the nearest large city, and that is Boston.
For our readers who are unfamiliar with your work, who hasn't read a Tess Gerritsen book before, which authors do you think are closer to your work?
Yes, probably Patricia Cornwell and Kathy Reichs would be the closest to my work. Yes.
What do you read? What sort of books do you read?
When I'm on holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read a lot of nonfiction. I love to learn new things. I'm very interested in botany, the natural world, and food. My father had a restaurant. He was a professional cook. So anything to do with food or cuisine, I'm fascinated by.
Okay. Did you read anything regarding Turkish cuisine?
Oh, I've been eating Turkish cuisine. I have 3 cookbooks from Turkey at home. So yes, one of the joys of coming to Turkey is getting to eat here.
You're a bestseller author, and you are such a product. That's what I was thinking when I was putting these books here. You have written so many books, but some of them must be closer to your heart than the others. What are your favorite books among all the books that you have written?
It's funny, the books I love the most are the books that did not sell very well, because I think they were different, they were unusual, and I wrote them out of love. There was a book called Gravity, which was the one that takes place on the space station. I loved that one just because it was such a challenge. And then I loved the book that I wrote called The Bone Garden, which is about medicine in 1830. And what was it like to be a doctor, and even worse, what was it like to be a patient? So that was the history of it was what fascinated me.
You have a very successful series with the Rizzoli Isles, but you have changed genres along the way. Why do you do it? You're so successful in one, but do you feel like writing a different thing? And how does it affect your readers? Do they say, well,
bring back Rizzoli
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't like being told that I have to keep writing the same kind of book over and over. I know that readers would like to see more Jane and Maura constantly, but I have so many other stories I want to tell. Like this one, or like the book I wrote about the violin player in World War II. Stories that are just, I need to tell now while I'm still young enough to tell them. So every so often I like to go off and do something different. And the last Rizzoli Isles book, which was number 12, Jane and Maura are both pretty happy. And I feel like it's a place I can let them rest for a while I tell these other stories.
But are you going to continue writing?
I'm waiting for a story to come to me about Jane and Maura. Yeah. They're not alive. They're still alive, so nothing permanent has happened to them.
These characters, when I'm talking about Jane and Maura, they're such strong characters and very, very successful characters. Why do you think people love these characters this much? Because they're both different and difficult in some ways, difficult characters. Why do you think that the readers are so fond of them?
Well, I think people are very fond of Jane, especially because she's an outsider. She doesn't fit in. She's the only woman on this homicide unit, and in the books anyway, she's very ordinary looking. She's not like a glamorous woman. We identify with that. We understand what it's like to be an outsider. I think all of us in some way are outsiders. So that was one of the things that appealed to people, was Jane's personality. Maura is very different. She's much more like me. And I think what especially women readers appreciate is it's about friendship between two women. It's about two women who, they're not competing with each other. They're very different, and yet they trust each other, and it's about female competence. Now, as a doctor, I worked in a field that had a lot of women, and I've come to trust them, and I've come to understand that sometimes the best man for a job is a woman. So that maybe that's why they're so appealing, is that women see themselves and their own relationships in these two.
And both these characters, actually, they struggle as women in their workspace, because and that's that touches the feminist question. Do you think there's still inequality for women? And as a female writer, did you struggle in the literary world as a female writer?
Yes. Well, there's inequality in, let's say, our occupations. Women have, it's clear that we can do so many professions, but we also have this additional burden of our children. And I think that it's almost expected that women will do most of the work of being a parent. So it's like we have two jobs. And that is always going to be, I think forever, it's always going to be something that women have to deal with. But in the literary world, I think to be taken seriously as a literary author, it's harder as a woman. But to be taken as a popular author, I think women are doing just as well as men, certainly in crime, fiction, and overall book sales. It seems to me that when I look at the bestseller list, there's a lot of women on there.
Because still, you know, like when I certain literary pieces, you know, they say female author, but they don't say male author. You know, it's just because it's as if they're surprised that, you know.
Well, it's as if we write about things that aren't important. You know, maybe when men write crime, it's, oh, this is an important book. But when women write about crime, it's, oh, another female, you know, mystery novel. And the fact that we write about relationships, about marriages, about things that are important to women, I don't think those subjects are valued very highly.
Your books have been published all over the world, like, and in the bestseller list all over the world, including China. Like, as part of your family probably is still in China, how does it feel to be published in China? The first time you were ever published in China, how did you feel?
Well, it was kind of. Well, what's funny about it is that people in China don't necessarily know I'm Chinese because of my name. Yeah. I have a very Caucasian name. I'm married to a Dutchman. So I think it took a while for them to realize that I was Chinese. And when I went back to China, I brought the ashes of my mother home to be buried. Only then did I realize how many of my books are there for sale. I don't always know what's happening in China.
Are you writing a new novel at the moment?
I am writing a new novel. It's, again, very different. It's not a Rizzoli Isles story. It's about an older woman. I think it's important that we have more older women characters. And this is a woman who once was a spy. She used to work for the CIA, and then she retired. And now she's sort of living an ordinary life up in a little town in Maine, like the one I live in. And she's raising chickens. And then the CIA comes calling and says, we need you back because something you know, or something that she is familiar with, only she can do. So what is it like to be happily retired and have to go back to work? What is it like to suddenly have to put on high heels again, and to dye your hair again, and to maybe put on a weapon again? So I love that idea of older women who are still valued. Yeah.
How does, like, you tour all around the world for the books, and you travel a lot. How does it feel to leave, like, the fictional world you created, like, at your desk, and then just travel and then have to leave everything behind?
Well, first of all, I love travel. I always believe that travel is important to writers. I think it helps our creativity. I've gotten some great ideas for books while I was traveling in Italy. In fact, 3 of my books were born in Italy. So it's one of the biggest pleasures I have, that and cooking and eating.
How do you like interacting with your readers? Like, when you travel, you see, like, because writing, I guess, is a very, very solitary action, and then when you meet your readers all over the world, and it's just different cultures, and you see where your book goes and what impact it has on other people. And they, like, I have seen your book signings, and it's just like hours and hours of waiting just to meet you. And it's like, how does it affect you?
Well, you know, it's really funny. The thing that I worry about most is that they're disappointed in me. That they see me and go, oh, that's Tess Gerritsen, you know. So that's the biggest stress for me when I do a book signing, or I go to another country and I see these wonderful readers. I don't want to disappoint them. I want them to think, yay, that's her. So it's funny. I know that some people are very afraid when they come to talk to me. Well, I'm nervous with them too.
And you have been to Turkey a couple of times,
Yes.
and how do you like it?
Well, I have been here 3 times for business and a couple of times for pleasure. So because I keep coming back for pleasure, I must like the country, right? There's a lot of the country I have not seen yet, and I would like to explore it some more.
And my last question, what do you think of your Turkish readers, like Turkish fans, and because they are so young and passionate?
Yes,
and
yeah. Well, I love the fact they're younger. You know, that they are very enthusiastic. They're sort of like the best fans of all are to be, you know, new readers who still have that love of a good story.
Okay. So that's it.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have asked so many questions. But
But it's like more like a conversation. It's great. Yeah.